Welcome back, climbers. I'm your co-host, Kaylee Floyd, and this is another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. Today, Bobby is joined by Koren Wise, CEO of Wise Technical Innovations. We're so excited to have Koren on here to talk about gap assessments, CUI, the flow of CUI, and even more. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope that you enjoy.
Yeah, if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your company, and then we're going to get into the topic of, things to look for, a little bit more, what kind of snake oil sadly is in the industry. I would have to say though, the industry is pretty tight knit, and we're pretty blessed with having just really good people in the industry. That's one of the things when I got in, I was really excited about, but that's not always the case. Yeah. So Gran, can you just tell us more about yourself, and then we'll kind of get into that topic.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm here in Norfolk, Virginia. I own Wise Technical Innovations, and I'm an assessor for the Cyber AB's assessment program. I'm also an instructor, so we are a licensed training provider holding the CCP and CCA classes, which is one of my favorite things to do, and I'll probably talk a little bit about why that is because it ties into the conversation. We're also a DoD contractor, so I kind of feel everybody's pain. I haven't been able to do, since CMMC, I've been inundated with that, so I haven't been doing a lot of DoD contracting, but nonetheless, have to get, and make sure that I'm compliant myself. And so we're in the same boat as everybody else. And that's really what I spend most of my days doing, aside from building enclaves, which keeps me super busy. So we build Azure Gov, GCC High enclaves. And I think one thing that, probably we got recognized for quite a bit was that we brought the smallest sub ever in December to the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment. And they got a perfect 110. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about that, just because it gives hope to the smaller companies. And I always like to clarify at the beginning, I am an assessor, but as assessors, we can still be consultants. We can just never be both for the same company. So if we decide to help a company on their journey, then we could never be anything or any part of their assessment.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that kind of misnomer got started. I feel that multiple times every year. People are like, "Oh, you're having a C3PO do your stuff." They can't do that. I'm like, yeah, they can. They just can't do both.
Right, for the same company.
Yeah, for the same company. So how many JSVAs, and some people may not know what a JSVA is. Can you maybe mention about what JSVAs are and how many you've participated in?
Good. So the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program is one of many assessments that are current. And I always say that because I think a lot of folks are not aware that the assessments have been here for a while. So CMMC, we always try to remind people, is going to be third-party assessments. But the DIPCAC, the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, has been doing these assessments for some time. Right. And they do DIPCAC mediums and DIPCAC highs. And then we also have the requirement to self-assess. So those assessments have been going on for a long time and been a requirement for us as DoD contractors for some time. And now there's the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program, which you could kind of think of as a bridge program where we've had this amazing opportunity to work with the people that have been doing this all along, which is the DIPCAC. And I can't even express what an amazing learning opportunity it is to be there with them, see how they see things, because they've got that precedence and they've done many more than any of us ever have. And so it's kind of like they're observing us during that assessment. They now let us lead the entire 800-171 portion of it. And they chime in if they want to. And when they do, you kind of just back off and let them take it. And they do. Right. So that is the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program. It's where a C3PAO, and by the way, we are not at this time a C3PAO. So when I'm hired as an assessor, I go work for a C3PAO as a 1099. And then we work with the DIPCAC on those assessments for companies that are selected for that program. Whenever people ask me how many I've been on, I try not to say the number, because I always worry with examples that I give of the JSVA that somebody would be like, oh, that's that company or that type of thing. But I think most of the assessors are active on JSVAs at any given time because there's not that many assessors. So we're almost always fielding a few SSPs at any given time to see if people are even ready for a joint surveillance voluntary assessment. That's because a company has come to a C3PAO, they say they want to sign up, and there's a whole bunch of screening that goes on before you really contact the DIBCAC and, say they're ready. If you're doing it in the right order, but some don't. And so sometimes that's done out of order. And then every once in a while, we're lucky enough where the company is selected and we go on to actually assess the company with the DIBCAC in the joint surveillance. But the most valuable experience ever was not being an assessor on a JSVA. It was being assessed with Jayco Aerospace in December. Definitely the most stressful thing I've ever done in my life. A lot of work, a lot of stress, and just reminds you how thorough that assessment is. I mean, they were an all cloud, enclave, and they spent, quite a few days up there in every single technical configuration that you can think of. And I mean, it is very, very thorough. So preparing for that and trying to get your ducks in a row and even practicing moving around Sentinel and all that stuff, being able to just fly through it all it's like practice.
That's a big deal. And I think we'll talk about that some, because not everybody is going to handle things equally. And if you're working with someone who's supposed to help prepare you, that's a huge deal. You don't want to fumble on the 5-yard line. Go through all the process of getting ready, and then you do your assessment, and you haven't done the homework of knowing exactly, like you said, where am I clicking on in Sentinel? Where am I going here? And the consultant or the organization you're working with, they need to help, or at the very least be ready to do that, so that when it comes time, that you're not wasting the assessor's time, because they don't seem to like that very much when that happens, right?
That's well, I mean, the DIBCAC's actually, I think, much kinder than people realize and much more understanding. They're not, these mean ogres that are like, assessment over.
Right.
But you don't want to reduce any assessor's confidence. I'll talk about this later on, but we're trained that we can stop when we're confident, and we're signing our name on the dotted line that we're confident you're achieving that objective. And if it goes up into EMAS with our name on it, so that's a pretty big deal. You don't want to do that. And to end that answer to your question, I've run the full gamut. So I've assessed on the other side as an assessor really big primes, which is a very different experience. There's just so much ground to cover during that assessment, and really complex architectures beyond anything that most of us are used to.
So true. So kind of what made me want to reach out to you about participating in a podcast with us, which I'm super thankful you did, is that you had a post. And can you share a little bit about that post and kind of the reactions that you had and what it was about?
Well, I was surprised at the reaction to that post. I try not to be negative, and I love it that you kind of started off by saying there's a lot of good people in the ecosystem, because I really hope that's kind of the way we frame it today and give people hints on how to get to the right people. But that was after a frustrating day. I think we've all had these days where we're looking at the results of a gap analysis for our customer that was done by somebody before we got to the picture. So they've already been ripped off for 30K or 50K and got literally zero output. And this is happening over and over and over again. Every week this happens. I'm with a customer. They show me the output from a previous engagement. They don't know why they're not getting anywhere, or they don't feel like they're getting anywhere. And when you take a look at what's been done, you realize, wow, I don't know if this is being done purposely, but it seems very fraudulent, and it's frustrating. And then the other thing that caused me to write that post is I think everyone is also experiencing panels in their city where they're having their first CMMC, event, and they don't know what they don't know. So the people who are putting on these types of events are selecting individuals who are not part of the ecosystem and literally can't answer a single question properly about CUI, about scoping, about anything. And they don't even know that they're, being so reckless or how irresponsible it is. But there's hundreds of contractors in the room that are hanging on their words, and they're giving incorrect advice. So that was what sparked that post, which obviously resonated.
Yeah. And I the ecosystem, your perspective that you have about it, Gran, it is a great ecosystem. I've been so pleasantly surprised and happy to be able to participate in it. And there's so much shoulder to shoulder effort with
Yeah.
everybody about different training systems, different, I'm part of the MSP for critical infrastructure. We're all competitors. We're all working together to try to help raise the tide for everybody. And there's just so many people that have that attitude. I've never been in an industry that is just so shoulder to shoulder like that. But like you said, that's not always the case, sadly. And so what we're wanting to try to do is, knowing that, a large majority, that's how that is. There is some situations where these types of things are happening. And in my opinion, but I'm curious, Corinne, what you think about this. Do you feel that this is going to start happening less once assessments start happening, and it's going to start to flesh out the pretenders of how some of those things are being done, because these people aren't going to be able to help people pass because of what they're doing? Do you feel that's going to start squelching and kind of calming that down, or do you think that's always going to be a challenge?
I think, podcasts like this, and, I was watching the one you did with Joy and all my good friends, Stuart, and then George was on there. But I think, folks that are just really trying to spread the word, that's working. But I also just think there's a natural evolution that has to happen, where certain things are going to happen, just like the way false claims right now is unfortunately scaring people into action, right?
Mm-hmm.
The same thing will happen, I believe, with C3PAOs and assessors and people getting ready, where there's going to be some who are doing it wrong, or not doing it thoroughly, or not doing it the way it was meant to be. And until action is taken, which will be a year or two from now, when the DoD develops some type of oversight over this process more than it is right now. It has to mature a little bit, right?
Right.
But, maybe a few breaches happen right after an assessor left,
Oof.
or right after an MSP claimed to have gotten somebody to a 110. I'm not saying that the assessor or the C3PA would be responsible for that at all. They probably wouldn't be responsible for it, but they might be looked at, and they might be asked, hey, was an obvious thing that existed last week when you ran that assessment. Why on earth was this not caught? And so certain things like that would have to happen. I mean, we saw this happen with Microsoft when they had a major breach. I think Congress, like, one of the first things somebody said was, where's their last FedRAMP assessment? We want to see it. That would be your natural curiosity, right? What
mine.
happened? Yeah. And so I think these things have to play out, and then the good ones will rise to the top and stick around, and hopefully the program will be more solid and more credible. And I'm not saying that it's not right now, but it's so new, it's got to go through those growing pains.
Yeah, I think just to compare perhaps, and maybe you have another analogy as well. I'm curious. But for me, as a managed service provider, like, there are lots of peer groups that I can be a member of that talk about how I can operate maturely and run. But when you look at CMMC, that doesn't exist yet, because that, like you said, the ecosystem is so new. There just isn't a breadth and depth of knowledge about how to do some of these things, what right looks like, what wrong looks like, per se, and these types of different systems. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can slice the spread about how you want to do a CMMC implementation. Mm-hmm. And, I don't even think we've touched really all of the possible scenarios. And all, as that starts to play out, more and more knowledge is going to start being spread around. And I think that's going to help. But do you have some examples based on your experience about, looking at those gap assessments, looking at how people have not really moved the needle? What are some things and some stories that you can share to help them kind of know that that's maybe perhaps happening to them? What can they do to try to possibly get off of that crazy train and get to something that's going to be more productive for them?
Right. I thought one thing that I've heard even you say before is that the end result of doing this is awesome, right? So this is not in vain. It can be a little bit painful, but there's nothing you're doing that you shouldn't be doing when you look at 800-171. The people who wrote it, they're very smart. And at the end of the day, this is a very heavy systems and network engineering document, right? We cannot take the technical out of it, but everybody wants to do that, right? Just like people want to take the technical out of cyber. Cyber is the end of the road when it comes to the level of talent somebody should have in systems and network engineering. It would be the end point, not the beginning. You don't start at cyber and then learn how to be a network and systems engineer. You're an excellent network and systems engineer. And then you are able to adapt that to protecting traffic flows and all the types of complex things that cyber has to do with hacking information. Like, these guys are so talented, right? So if I think the number one thing that I see is my clients or students or whoever else, they're hiring compliance people that don't have technical people on their staff. So don't get me wrong, the documentation and the parts of 800-171 that don't have to do with network and systems engineering are equally important. They're so important. And you need somebody that's talented in that way as well. Like a network and systems engineer, the ones I deal with every day, they're horrible at writing policy. And they're horrible, most of us are horrible at, that's not our strong point, right? So they didn't pick a company with all the talent pool that's needed to get this done. Sometimes that's one person, right? Sometimes one person is an excellent documentation, policy writer, procedure writer. They're a systems engineer, they're a network engineer, and they understand cyber. But a lot of times that's not the case, and that's a tall order for any person. How about just, do you have someone on your staff that is a network and systems engineer? Because I promise you, if they don't, or they're not tapping into one, they will not ever be able to make you 800-171 compliant. If they don't understand a router, they don't understand a VLAN, and they don't understand boundaries, and they don't understand what it truly means to protect, control, monitor, detect, there's no way. So it's not a tall order for a network and systems engineer to read those lines in 800-171 and say, oh yeah, this is what we need, this is how we do it. It becomes much less overwhelming when you've got the right person working on it. And then what I find is they're like, you might find an excellent network and systems engineer, but they don't know the language yet of 800-171. They need translation. And so that's why all the different types of talent are important. There might just be someone who's not as technical, but is excellent at what the assessor's looking for and, presenting the right type of evidence. And so I think that's the number one thing that I see is a lack of understanding that anyone who doesn't have that element that we're talking about, they're going to spin you around in a documentation wheel, a big compliance story, and you'll never get anywhere. They're pretending. This week we need to work on this procedure, and this week, well, guess what? That's backwards, because it all starts, and this is bad sign number 2. Bad sign number 2 is that they don't understand that they can't get going on this engagement without the basics. The basics are an accurate inventory of your assets, your users, your devices, and your service or process accounts. The second basic is your network diagram. And the third basic is your CUI flow. So we can talk about each of those separately, but I think we should talk about each of those mandatory items. You can't even start your engagement with a company until those 3 things. That's where you should start. Let me put it that way.
I was smiling because I went through that journey that you just described. Like, when I was trying to tackle it, I was like, okay, I'm an engineer by design. Know thyself, right? I'm an engineer. I grew the company. I'm the CEO, but I'm an engineer at heart. So as we've kind of worked on our journey, I was focusing on trying to do both. I'm not great at the documentation piece. And so I had to bring on somebody else that was much better at that, way more efficient. And boy, did that make all the world of difference for us in how we were doing that, because I needed someone that's the lane that they own and can really swim in and really get the most bang for us to be able to move that. And then I worked on the scoping, the design, the architecture, the documentation of all of that. Those are just such a big deal, and neither of those can be overlooked. They're such a major component. But I had to learn that the hard way, sadly. So, over the years as I've been working, those are lessons that we've learned. But the areas that you talked about, I just want to kind of dive into those more, because I think those are so good. Those critical starting points, those could be, would you say, red flags if you're not seeing someone want to try to do this? What's some insights that you can share about each of those briefly, that if someone doesn't really know those, they can kind of use that as a barometer, right, to take a measurement and kind of go, maybe this isn't so good. Can you touch on that a little bit more?
Well, I think a good sequence of events would be to fully understand the current state, and the output from fully understanding the current state, which is going to come from a very thorough gap analysis. The output from that is going to be at least, an accurate asset inventory of what's going on right this moment, for the scoping that's been determined. So that gap analysis will lead to, first of all, kind of saying, this is what it looks like your scope is based on what you've said so far. And there's a lot of questions that erupt from that gap analysis. Like, for me, it's always, what are these workers doing? How do they work with the CUI? Where do they get it? Where do they send it? What systems do they use? What applications do they use? From cradle to grave, as one of my fellow instructors, Kat Adams, that's her favorite saying. But
love Kat.
If we can't understand that for every single flow that there is, then we will not be able to do this. So one flow could represent hundreds of people in the way that they work, right? They all get it the same way. They all use the same systems. They all store at the same place, and they never send it anywhere, or they do. But that's an example of a flow. And then maybe there's this other contract that you want. It's got a completely different flow. People are like, wait, we got to know all that? Yes, we cannot get started until we know how everybody's working with CUI. You can't protect what you don't understand. So it's impossible, right? So if we don't figure out what all the flows are during that gap analysis and determine what the true scope is, the assessors might, or will, hopefully, if they're good assessors. I say might because assessments are limited to a certain time frame, and they have boundaries that they have to stay in. But assessors are pretty talented people. Normally, they pass that exam and they have a certain background. They're pretty good at asking important questions. Not that they're digging or trying to make people fail, but they're going to notice red flags, and we don't want them to notice a red flag that we didn't notice, or a flow that we didn't notice. That becomes evident during the assessment. So all flow. And anyway, when I'm talking to customers, they might say, I don't really know what those field workers do or how they do. And they just think that that's an okay answer, but we have to know. We have to go talk to them, ask them. So I'll just keep saying, have we gotten a meeting with so-and-so yet? And they're like, wait, you need to talk to a worker, a field worker, a nurse, this, that. Yeah. We need to talk to one representative of that CUI flow so that we can understand what it's like out there. Are they using their laptop? Are they using their phone? Are they what's going on at from their perspective with their interaction with the CUI? A big red flag would be that your consulting company is not really concerned with those CUI flows, or doesn't understand how important they are and how important it is by the end of that gap analysis to get an accurate depiction of your network. The network diagram's got to be accurate, and the CUI flows. And from there, the other bad sign is they want to write policy that you haven't even done the future design yet. And we don't even know what the future state is going to be.
The scope and all that fun stuff.
Why are we writing a policy and procedures to a state that we're going to be completely changing? That shouldn't be it at all. There should be a very technical discussion. Not only technical, obviously there's other domains, the personnel domain, risk management, incident response. How are we going to, what did our POA&Ms that came out of that gap analysis say we need to do? And let's go through this project by project and figure out how we're going to tackle. This is project management. We got a bunch of mini projects. How are we going to tackle them all? Let's see if there's some overlapping work, all that stuff you learn in your PMP class or whatever PM class you took.
Yeah. So not trying to put words in your mouth, but what you would, just to kind of summarize there, would be that you want to see that they're doing a proper gap assessment of understanding. They have a
Right.
good result in return. They're looking at the flow of your data. They're looking at the architectural design. They're understanding the mechanics that are going to be involved to pull it off. So you kind of paint this storied picture, and now you start writing policies around what that's going to look like, and you're going to implement projects to get it there and start happening. Does that sound right?
I mean, that's a very general, and I mean, probably the most important step in between all that is to determine the official scope of CUI. Like, what are we doing here? Are we doing enterprise where, or are there home offices that are in scope? Are there, cloud services that are in scope? Subcontractor, that we, from all of that learning that we do at the OSC, and learning about their flows, that we determine a proper scope. And so another bad sign would be maybe that whoever you're working with is not even aware of the scoping guide out there in the DoD CIO's website or the assessment guide. And this goes to training. I can't really understand how anybody would be able to help you through this without RPA or even better, CCP. I mean, I've never had a student start CCP on Monday and finish on Friday and say, I already knew all that, ever. Not one time. And I've taught hundreds and hundreds of students.
It was a fire hose for me. I was like, whoa.
It's awesome. It's so awesome because, I mean, and by the way, my classes are filled with MSPs, not OSCs. My classes, not assessors. I mean, the CCP, the certified CMMC professional, is the first step to become an assessor, which the next step is certified CMMC assessor. So you would think that everyone in the class wants to be an assessor, but that is not the case. We have about 2 or 3 people in there that are going down the assessor track. Everybody else is an OSC or an MSP trying to get ready, which is, I have to applaud. That's so awesome that there's no better way to get ready than to go through the 110 controls one by one and understand each one, have a chance to ask questions, learn scoping, learn the cap, find out what your assessment's going to be like. So if someone hasn't been through that, I don't know how they would really be able to help as well.
You kind of opened 2 doors there, which I want to make sure we cover both because I think they're amazing. Is you talked about the CCP, you talked about having that knowledge. What are some things that might be red flags knowledge-wise that you would want to see whoever you're working with have? I mean, if they have a CCP or CCA, that's enough. Great. You don't have to go any further. Or is there more to it? Can you put some more flesh on the bones about what kind of knowledge and certifications and expectations would you want to have from someone before you engage with them?
So I don't want to be too judgmental and say, you have to have this or you have to have that. I'm a CISSP. I have a lot of certs in my background with Cisco and Microsoft. It obviously gives me a huge competitive edge. So I'm telling you that I use that stuff every single engagement. I am using my network engineering skills to the fullest. It is a tall order, this stuff, right? So, and even I get stumped because I don't know every single technology. If somebody comes to me, I had this amazing company come to me. They're in AWS. That is not my expertise. And we need to bow out gracefully when that happens and say, I can help you with this part of things. That's exactly what I said. I said, I'd be excellent at shooting holes in everything and asking some hard questions and complementing the expertise of an AWS expert. But what the talent that is needed is determined by is the technologies that they have invested in. If they got a Palo Alto firewall, do you have someone who can actually look at that? And maybe the person is on their team already. That's fine. Just make sure that and again, this goes back to project management. What are the skill sets needed in order to evaluate this environment and fix it or get it to its future state that's 80171 compliant? Don't put people's names there yet. Just identify the skills. We need someone that knows Palo Alto firewall. We need someone that knows GCC High and Azure. We need someone that understands hybrid because we're bringing it back on-prem. And we need someone that understands this MSSP tool or MSP, whatever. Now that you've figured out the skill sets needed or the different technologies in use, now go through what you have today that could be mapped to those different skills that are needed. And where is your gap? What don't you have? Are you missing something? And the two choices are send somebody to training so that you can get the skill that you need for that hole, or go find someone with that talent. And there's so many places now where we can go. But, you do have to be very careful with 80171 and sensitive data, that you're not, going places that you're not allowed to go, like to non-US citizens if you've got ITAR export control. So you've got to be really careful at the same time as you fill those skills gaps, to put them through your full onboarding authorization process, and just be super, super careful if you do have to fill gaps with people you haven't worked with before.
So would you be comfortable if someone didn't have any CCP or staff? I know I'm getting a little more specific. I'm sorry, but I just want what your thoughts about that.
So I really appreciate what the AB has done. I think they have lined up a lot of different flavors of training for different levels of involvement in the ecosystem, right? And I don't even know if they expected CCP to be so popular, but at the end of the day, the reason it's so popular is because there's not a single thing in that class that you don't need to know.
Right.
The only thing I could even think of that you wouldn't really need to know day to day is the part about the Code of Federal Regulation and all of the DFARS clauses, but really kind of do need to know that too, so that you can understand the requirements. So that one might say that's the most important part of the class. So I am biased towards CCP, and
Right.
CCA even better. That means they've gone through all of it once, and then they went through it again at a super deep level.
Right.
And I have that on my list today. Is I caution people against dealing with a company who doesn't have a CCP or CCA. I don't think they're going to be able to get you there without that training. It's just too much in there that you have to know about the assessment in order to do it right. So we have people all the time that say, we're ready. This happens at every conference. We're good. We're ready. We're ready. And it's just because they don't know they're not ready. They don't mean to be misleading. You don't know you're not ready until you take that class and realize what the assessment's going to be like. And that leads us to another red flag, is comparing two things: devaluing the program, saying it's stupid or that's dumb, this is a scam, this is that. That's not going to be helpful at all in your journey to be compliant. And the other thing is comparing it to other assessment types or audits. So this is unlike any audit that anyone I know of has been through. It's not like SOC 2. It's not like ISO anything. It's not even like RMF. Why? Because, and I hear that one all the time. Oh, I've been doing RMF since 1902, and I'm the best in the world at RMF. I'm like, that's awesome, and that means 853 really, really well, which is an important thing for this, right? But what is not the same is in RMF, you have so much more control. You are able to accept risk. You're selecting controls. You're doing
Tailoring.
This and that. They don't understand how powerless we are and how much is on the line for an assessor. We can't accept risk barely at all. We can't skip past objectives or controls pretty much, unless there's a super, super obvious or good reason, or the DoD CIO has written them a letter saying they're excused. It's really hard to not do the assessment in this very strict way. With the 320 objectives, we have to check them all off, write a paragraph about why we believe they're doing this across their entire scope, and then our name as an assessor is on that as permanent record in DoD systems. So I think people need to realize that this might be a little bit more rigid. Not that it's harder or better or anything like that. It's more rigid than these other more flexible assessments that they may have been through in the past.
Yeah, I've never had anyone that have objected about doing the CCP, but then went through it that said that was a waste. Every time.
Never.
It was always like, oh, why did I fight this? I really should have went through it.
Yeah.
The knowledge they get through it is just invaluable. And they immediately kind of, light bulb, they're like that. I really do. I'm glad that I went through it. And I really do think this is the right thing to do. And so if you're going to be doing it on your own and not engaging with a consulting company, or if you're going to be engaging with a consulting company of some magnitude or sort, making sure that they have at least a vast amount of experience with doing actual assessments, have participated in them and gone through them, or at a minimum have those certifications would be my level of comfort.
Yes.
And I would want to make sure that they
Hey,
they
you
have
said it,
those.
not me.
Yeah. But the reality is that there's so much it costs at it, right? To go through this. You mentioned some dollar values of some people that had spent some money when they came to you, and it was really hurtful, I'm sure, for you to see that happen and go, I wish I could give you you got kind of stuck discount, but I mean, it's going to take your time, and you're going to have to charge them what you need to in order for you to get them where they need to be. And do you have other stories that you can kind of share about what you've experienced in the industry about those types of situations?
So, I try to keep it positive, but I would just say that, I've had people get up in CCP and storm out because they realized that they were getting taken advantage of hugely. So that literally happened. They stormed out, made a phone call, fired whoever was their consultant, and came back into class. Not stormed out of my class because they were mad, stormed out because they were mad that they realized they'd been being taken advantage of.
Right.
And I think it's a lot more difficult to get taken advantage of when you're educated. Also, you can do a whole lot of it. One thing you realize is there's half of these I can do by myself, right? And then you kind of go through and you're like, I can't do these ones by myself. So I would say what I'm seeing the most, Bobby, as far as if we were to talk about the negative side of things or the side that can hurt people, it's just folks aren't checking the marketplace. That's one of the best things that the AB gave us, is a place to validate credentials. And so the biggest problem is that people don't know that they can validate credentials, and that this is the type of thing that you can't do just because you put a new sign out on your building and said, which is happening everywhere, right? Everyone's on this now. We get emails just flooding our email inbox every day. Everybody is a CMMC expert now. So I would say checking that Cyber AB marketplace just to see you can go to the individual level. You don't have to go to the company level. Who's going to be working on my environment, and let me see what they pop up as in the AB marketplace. If they haven't been trained on this at all, I promise you, even if they are 800-171 experts, the little details of the assessment are very, very important. You have to understand how this is going to work.
Now, I'll mention this, and I'm going to take a little bit of a liberty here, so you tell me if I'm overstepping the line. I was talking, I think it was a few weeks ago, with a company that was thinking about engaging with us, and after we talked, we were like, here's what I would do if I was you. I would do this. I would go back to this other company, have this discussion, and go with them. I'm just sharing honestly. I just want you to know that this is probably the best path for you based on where you're at right now. And they were just shocked that they're not trying to get shoehorned into something. But I think so many people in the industry are just comfortable sharing. I think you could pretty much reach out to a lot of the people in the industry. I'm happy, and I'm sure you probably would too, Koren. If you have questions about does this sound right? Just some bearing checks on some things. We're not here to try to sell you on, the moment that you try to reach out to us about, oh, you need to do this. Everybody just, this is what I love about this industry, really cares so much that if you're not sure, if you think you might be having a bad experience, just reach out to somebody and talk, just ask.
That's such great advice. And I want to talk a little bit about the MSPs. I actually feel like MSPs are staged very well to play a wonderful part in the ecosystem, just in the exact way that you're doing, because of what I'm harping on, which I hope I don't get, people don't make people upset by what I'm saying, but we cannot deny the technical element to this assessment. Mm-hmm. And MSPs, they already have that very technical background, most of them. And yes, MSPs in the past had not been held to maybe this strict of a standard. And definitely there are MSPs in the past that we're not following, good protocol. But there are a lot that are and do, and they have highly technical staffs. And so it's akin to like, if you gave someone who had never been in the kitchen a recipe, and then you gave a famous cook that same recipe, the output is going to be extremely different, right? And the MSPs, they've been in the kitchen a long time, right?
Right.
This recipe, I can teach you how to do it. 801. I can teach you what 801.71 means pretty easily in a week. I can translate the language to you, and I can tell you what assessors are looking for. All these different assessments, like I do Department of Homeland Security. I'm a lead assessor for AES HVA. It's just a different flavor. Tell me how you want me to write the report. Tell me how you want me to, which controls you want me to assess. Tell me the rules of this particular assessment, right? That's the easy part to learn. What you can't teach somebody is 20 years of IT.
Right.
But MSPs, they already have the hard part. They are the cooks. They are the kitchen. And they can pick up the rest of this stuff. I'm not trying to downplay the complexity of compliance or policy writing or procedure. They might need to supplement a little bit on that end because they're not traditionally very good at that, but they are good at the hard part, right? And maybe the MSPs need to also think about bringing in now these folks that are compliance folks that are good at the policy and procedure.
I was just going to say that. I mean, it's so true. I get looked at weird sometimes when people are like, "Okay, so you're in the CMMC space, so you're going to do everything for the client." I'm like, "I'm an MSP, man. Like, in my MSPs that aren't going for CMMC, do I help them with their policy on background checks?"
Yeah.
No, not really. That's not really what an MSP traditionally does, right? We're, like you just said, we're more in the technical area. We're the things that our clients aren't used to or not very good at doing. Those are the things that we pick that mantle up. The problem is, are we doing it in a way, not really a problem, but a challenge is, are we doing it in a way that's productive for their CMMC journey, or are we doing it in a way that could potentially compromise their CMMC journey?
Heard it bad, yeah.
And so the MSPs can be your savior or they can be your downfall. So how could you, one thing that I've always suggested, and I'm just curious what your thoughts is like, if you're engaging with an MSP, you should still talk to whoever's eventually going to be your C3PO and just have a sounding board about what you're trying to do, or at least have another outside consultant just to make sure that the MSP process that's being involved is going to be healthy for you moving down the road. Do you feel like that's good advice?
So right now, when I have clients that have MSPs, and this is on the consulting side, not the assessing side, it adds a huge layer of complexity for the very reason that you're saying. So now we've got a whole bunch of shared responsibility that's going to come into play during the assessment. And yes, you do want to reach out to a C3PAO earlier rather than later. Not that they can give you any inside scoop or anything like that, but you can interview C3PAOs the same way you interview anyone, right? If they can't answer a question, they're just going to say, "I'm sorry, I cannot answer that." But you're still going to get a feel for what the C3PAO is familiar with. Maybe they've assessed people using MSPs before. Maybe they never have. So you can ask the really simple and basic questions. And they're probably going to ask you some questions as well, just to try to get the preliminary information about your company. Even their questions that they're asking you might be insightful. Oh, they were interested in that. They were asking us about this or that. But the part that's really hard with MSPs is how hurtful they can be to the OSC's compliance if they don't have their ducks in a row.
Right.
And
it's sort of what I was referring to when I was saying C3POs is like, because they can engage you in a consulting, they can't do both. Yeah. But if you're able to engage with a C3PO or another reputable, certified, qualified organization that can sort of help you understand, just spending money on a consulting call to have your MSP just sniffed about their approach would be well worth the investment, because you don't want to find out when you start that engagement with who's going to be your organization's going to do your assessment. They kind of go, "I don't think you're really ready."
Right. That is such a great idea, what you just said. So who cares if you spend $500 to hire an assessor, a CCA for an hour who's not going to be your assessor in the future, but instead you want them to poke some holes. Tell me what you would want to know about this. Tell me what you would be concerned about in 800-171 related to our use of this MSP. That'd be the best $500 you ever spent, or
For
what,
sure.
1,000, whatever it is, however much time you want them to spend doing that. I mean, what a great way to find out sooner rather than later what the problem's going to be.
And I don't know if I would, this is just me as an MSP, I can say this. I'm not, so don't think I'm putting words in your mouth, because I'm not. As an MSP, I don't know if I would straight up gospel trust an MSP doing your full scope. Like, I would want to have, unless they have just been in the industry and just have owned that space like nobody's business, I would want to have another third-party organization to just look at your scope to make sure it sounds right? Just spend some time and having someone just kind of look at it, like you said, poke some holes, because as you're going to spend a lot of money and project time to build that scope out. And if you don't have someone else sort of looking at it, now this is where having maybe somebody in-house that has a CCP experience could be really helpful for the OSC. But I don't know. What's your thoughts about that engaging?
Well, you kind of reminded me of something else that's really, really important. And we keep going back to engaging experts that have been trained in this, and having them take a look at what you've got going on. And this is another red flag, would be that a company that you're working with, or an MSP that you're working with, doesn't understand. It's kind of the beauty of 800-171, and it's the part that everyone's not seeing, and it drives me absolutely nuts. 800-171 is in alphabetical order, the domains, right? So it doesn't mean that you're supposed to do access control first, and then you do this one, and then you do this one. This is just a alphabetized checklist. And Jacob Horn did a video recently where he talks even more about 853 and how the actual individual controls and things like that, how they came up with their numbers. That's kind of interesting. But as far as the domains go, they're in alphabetical order. I bring that up because the systems and communication protection domain is got the most important control for beginning everything. It's the boundary. We have to know where the boundary's at. And there's going to be several of them in a lot of situations, right? So you're going to draw a circle around all your boundaries. That first circle might be the center of the universe, where your cage code is and your headquarters is, or your OSC main area is at, right? Another, you might be communicating with home offices. They need a circle too. They've got to have a boundary, right? So draw all your circles. If you can't tell the assessor where the boundary is, the DIBCAC, I can tell you right now, if they can't feel that boundary, you're in bad shape.
Right.
At home, even, you can get them off your back by saying, here's the and now I'm going to bring it to MSPs. Here's the boundary, and here's how we keep it in that boundary. If they realize that you don't understand the technology and the boundary isn't what you think it is, and it's leaking back into your home wireless network, it's leaking over to the printer, and you think the boundary's at this one endpoint, and they're like, nah, you did not create a boundary. You had a boundary, but when you did this, you went outside of it. The reason we need the boundary is because 800-171 tells us there's the inside and the outside, internal and external. So every boundary, we call it a covered space, is that safe space that we work in. And there's all these things that have to be true in that safe space. And that's what a lot of 800-171 is about. The people inside of it, the devices inside of it, and the way we transmit.
That's really complex. Everybody tends to kind of go to enclave, like a virtual enclave is the only way you can do boundaries.
And that's a boundary too.
That is a boundary. It's not the only way that you can do it, but I think doing a virtual enclave is definitely paints a prettier, more defined picture.
Yep.
It starts to get messy when you start involving in scope and, local resources with your virtual resources and other things. Those are all definitely doable, but I think the difficulty factor goes up exponentially when you involve an MSP. They have their own infrastructure. How are they scoped? How's their boundary attaching to your boundaries, right?
That's the really important part. That was going to be what I said next. So let's go to the MSP's boundary and your boundary and that external connection, right? So external connections, inside of each boundary is what we call a covered space. This is why they want your MSP to get CMMC certified. That is now a covered space. They have their own internal area, and it's been certified, and it's practicing all of the things it's supposed to. And then that external connection has a whole nother set of rules. All this stuff kicks in the second you go external. And the boundaries at both places is where we do monitoring, controlling, protecting. Those words mean something. Go to the system communication domain. The assessor is going to go straight to that boundary. Where is the point at which it becomes external? Where's the point at which it becomes internal? Is that a sealed boundary, or is it leaky? And that's what the MSP, when they try to involve themselves with the OSC, if they could focus on that alone, not having a leaky boundary and being very specific about how they've secured their boundary and their boundary, the point at which it becomes where your router, your gateway, that you're doing all of those things that 801.171 says has to be done at that point. This is all a really great story. When you look at 801.171, it's not as complex as everyone thinks. It's asking for these boundaries and respect for external transmission, and rules that kick in when you go outside the boundary, and only dealing with others who have a boundary, including cloud service providers.
And that I think maybe is a good transition to another point is you work a lot with MSPs from a consulting of training side, right? Based on some of the things that you talked about. As MSPs, we use a lot of tools.
Right.
These tools can be our savior or our boat anchor when we jump in the water, especially when it comes to the CMMC process. There are a lot of tools out there that are talking to MSPs and saying that they can solve their CMMC journey problems and they can then resell them to their clients and things of that nature. What's your thoughts about that for an MSP? And then when MSP engages you and you're an OSC, what do they need to be weary of about that MSP's tools and those types of things? Can you sort of talk about that? I know that's a big Pandora's box, but what's your thoughts?
Well, I think if you just take those tools and bring it back to what we were just saying, is the tool able to respect all of the elements of what we were talking about, boundaries and secure communications and the other rules that are involved in 801.171, and including the rules that are going to be involved in Title 32 when the new rule comes out. The fact that certain data, if the MSP is housing it for customers and they have set themselves up in a cloud service provider type fashion, they are going to step into that FedRAMP territory. CMMC is, and I have a whole video on that. I think
I love that one
for that video, but they're very different purposes.
Yep.
And it's completely logical that when you begin to tell people, oh, it's safe, put your data over here in my tool, or I need to pull your data back over here, that you're held to a standard that inspects the elements that are involved with that, which is a whole different set of elements and architecture concerns that are not addressed with CMMC. And so when you talk about these tools, I finally wisened up to this, but I used to accidentally spend a lot of time. I always want to make sure I meet with people who have questions. But I think we all get those people who want to sell their tool and, they've got this great tool and this tool that, and this tool this and this tool that. The tools that your MSP is using is one of the first questions you should be asking them. What are the tools you use? Will you be pulling my logs back to your environment? Will you be popping up on people's desktops to offer remote assistance? And I need to understand every single detail about the configurations involved with that, the product, its FedRAMP status, all that stuff.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to just spending some time with a qualified individual, preferably a CCA, in my opinion, someone that's gone through assessments, that thoroughly understands scoping. You could spend a few hours talking with them and having them talk to your MSP just to analyze just critical questions like you're saying, it could save you so much headache down the road. Don't spend 8 months to a year with that MSP, then do it. Like I would have that conversation with them right away. And dare I say, if you're in the process of picking an MSP, hire Koren to help you pick the MSP.
Well, I know a lot of amazing, like yourself, in the ecosystem. I was going to say, you all like spit out quite a few of the most famous tools that MSPs are using right now. Just what are they?
Kaseya, ConnectWise, Ninja, Synchro, tons of Screen Connect, Splashtop, all kinds of different tools that they use.
Now take those tools and tell me what someone who was extremely irresponsible could accidentally, I'm not saying they did it purposely, could accidentally do with, they're not familiar with sensitive data, DoD type customers. They are pulling back logs and possibly even have opened up their tunnel to controlled unclassified information. They have the keys to the kingdom. What could they do to jeopardize without ill intentions, just pure irresponsible or not knowing? How do those tools end up posing a danger to the client?
I mean, they're a huge security risk because you can do so much. If your MSP gets compromised, you're screwed. It is a very, very bad day.
That's what I wanted you to say.
It's a very bad day. What's your approach towards your tools on the compliance in scope environment, right? You could use some more latitude in out of scope situations, but the in scope, like, are you going to use a remote management tool, right? To be able to push the patches and to have full control of the systems. And, those are questions that you want to ask. For us, we kind of said, you know what, we feel like this is a danger zone, especially in CMMC. So we decided we're just going to utilize Intune. We're going to utilize that for our management piece that we're going to have, because we just didn't want to introduce that in the compliance environment, just because there's challenges from the security perspective. There's challenges from the assessment perspective. And we just really wanted to steer away from that whole situation, because right now there just isn't a good FedRAMP solution to use in that space unless you self-host. And that's a whole other podcast conversation that would be very interesting to have. I'd love to have with you about it.
Yeah.
Is there anything else, Koren, that you feel like you'd like to cover before we close out?
No, I really enjoyed talking to you. I mean, I think the biggest point here is we need MSPs, and they are a critical part of this program that are charging towards it instead of running away from it. You're helping the nation. I mean, that's all there is to it. We need more MSPs to follow your lead and do what you're doing and jump in, and it's going to pay off. It's good for your own network and your own company. It's good for all the people you're helping, and it's where the country needs to go. So,
well, thank you so much, Koren, and I appreciate the compliment. Knowledge is really important if you're stepping into that space, and either you need to surround yourself with, if you don't have much, with a good consultant and an MSP to be able to pull all that off, or you fully engage with, learning to really know it yourself, because I mean, it's just too much to try to tackle on your own if you haven't had significant experience and time. And it's definitely not something you just kick to your intern. Like, you don't just say, we just hired this guy yesterday, he's going to help us do our CMMC. You're like, no.
No.
You're in trouble. Well, Koren, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. How can people engage and connect with you? Can you share some ways that they can connect with you?
I think the best place is just to go to either my profile on LinkedIn, which is Koren Wise, and that's a great place to kind of see other things that I've put out there, or go to my website, which is WTInetworks.com. And that's where you can sign up for CCP class. I would love to have anybody that's watching in CCP class. I just love that class because I think it's, so beneficial. But there's also a lot of other resources out there, and you can take a look. You can even schedule 30 minutes for free with me anytime, one time, just to ask questions. And that is just to help the DIB. It's not for salespeople, but more for OSCs who need help and really have questions like you were talking about earlier. We try to make sure we always meet with them.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, all of you, thank you so much. And if you haven't followed us on social, please do. Try to make sure, depending on what media you're on, click and subscribe. And we always are open to comments or questions or suggestions. And as always, everybody, keep on climbing.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.